What do Hindus believe about life after death?
At the heart of Hindu belief about the nature of human life is a notion called metempsychosis, also called reincarnation or transmigration of soul. Life is an infinite continuum punctuated by episodes of embodiment. Death is therefore the opposite of birth, not of life. One can escape the cycle of birth and death by liberating the soul, freeing the self from all attachments. According to the law of karma, human beings always get what they wish for in spades. If my every effort in this life is the selfish acquisition of wealth or power or pleasure, chances are I will die wanting more. Unsatisfied desire is a form of energy so potent that it keeps the self ensnared in the bonds of attachment that ensure the soul will experience yet another embodiment in some form or another. Hindus call this potentially endless cycle of rebirth samsara.
What does one do to convert to Hinduism?
Throughout its long history, Hinduism's ranks have swelled with the addition of entire tribes and other social groups that came under the influence of Hindu kingdoms. Formal conversion to Hinduism nowadays is relatively rare in India, at least among Indian nationals. Membership in the tradition's many sub-communities is far more a matter of heredity than of deliberate choice. Some non-Indians have migrated to India out of a desire to enter Hinduism formally. They typically present themselves at the temple or ashram of their choice and ask to join. And over the past several decades, small numbers of Europeans and Americans have joined. Various missionary-minded branches of the Hindu tradition, such as the Vedanta Society, with its associated monastic order, or the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Some communities provide prospective new members basic instruction in the teachings of the group's founders and in the sacred texts. But membership does not depend on formal assent to a particular creed or system of doctrine. The one important and nearly universal ritual symbolizing conversion is the naming ceremony, or namakarana. Taking a new name, often containing a reference to the deity one chooses to worship, symbolizes the devotee's seriousness and commitment.
The two schools. What are Hinduism's various spiritual paths?
Karma/action, proper ritual and ethical action as a means to spiritual progress, including purification of one's deeds through detachment from the fruits of one's actions. Jnana/knowledge, attainment of intuitive or mystical understanding of the essential unity of all reality, resulting from meditative approach to the scriptures and wisdom traditions. Bhakti/devotion, participation in the divine life through devotion to a chosen manifestation of the deity. Complete emotional attachment to the chosen deity, and unselfish service to God.
Are Hare Krishnas Hindus?
Members of an organization known officially as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness are Vaishnavites and devotees of Krishna and his consort Radha. They are followers of the teaching of the Bengali saint Chaitanya. A former pharmaceutical salesman named A.C. Bhaktivedanta 1896 to 1977, was initiated by a Vaishnava guru and eventually became a sannyasi in 1959. He founded the organization in 1965 in the United States, establishing a number of temples. Membership includes both married householders and celibate. Members of monastic communities attached to the temples. Bhaktivedanta instilled in the organization a sense of missionary zeal, and in 1970 decided to take the movement back to India. There he established denominational temples in Vrindavan and Mayapur, the birthplaces of Krishna and Chaitanya respectively. ISKCON maintains a number of temples across North America, some supporting themselves through vegetarian restaurants attached to them. Devotees in the United States came to be popularly known as the Hare Krishna people because they often gathered in public to celebrate their joyous praise of God by chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Hare.
What questions does the prospect of interfaith marriage raise for Hindus?
In India, with its vast Hindu majority, it is still largely taken for granted that young people will marry members of their own denomination or sect as well as of their own caste. Outside India, various external cultural pressures are changing such assumptions. Since Hindu tradition remains so intimately bound to cultural background, many traditional Hindu families would naturally prefer that their children marry other Hindus. By and large, the younger generation continues to do so.
Is nonviolence particularly important in Hindu beliefs?
Leaders familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. may recall that he spoke of being especially influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's teachings on nonviolent resistance, concern for ahimsa, non-injury, including respect for all forms of life, seems to have become an important theme in Hindu tradition following the rise of Buddhism and Jainism in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. Ahimsa ranks first among a list of 10 spiritual qualities, called yamas, or restraints, in the classical system of yoga attributed to Patanjali. Avoidance of all injury, in word and deed, began with the rejection of Vedic sacrifice and as a central practice of small groups of ascetics and grew to include the practice of vegetarianism.
Are there any other forms of religious pilgrimage?
Ziyara, pronounced Zyara, meaning visitation, is a form of minor pilgrimage still popular all over the world. With a few regional exceptions such as the Arabian Peninsula. Devout Muslims travel to the tombs of holy persons to receive barakah. Blessings, by association with the saint's power and holiness. Elaborate shrine complexes have grown up around some of these sacred sites. Since the 19th century especially, Muslim authorities in Saudi Arabia have sought to stamp out the practice because they have deemed the veneration of miracle-working saints a threat to pure monotheism. Ironically, Saudi Arabia remains the home of the prime example of Ziyara. Each year millions of pilgrims to Mecca make a special trip north to Medina to visit the mosque in which Muhammad, his daughter Fatima, and the first caliph, Abu Bakr, are buried. Sunni Muslims from Morocco to Malaysia continue to visit secondary holy places, most of which are graves of Sufi sheikhs. Shi'i Muslims also visit sites connected with similar friends of God. But their devotional travel revolves more around a number of distinctively Shiite holy places. They are the tombs of the Imams, spiritual and biological descendants of Muhammad through his daughter Fatima. Most of the Imams' shrines are in Iran, with its overwhelmingly Shi'i population, and southern Iraq, where most of that country's slight majority of Shiites live.
Who are the Shiites?
At least 6 sub-denominations make up Shaiva Hinduism. As with Vaishnavism, their views on the nature of the divine-human relationship set them apart. A major sect in South and Southeast Indian region called Tamil Nadu is known as Shiva Siddhanta, truth about Shiva. Tracing its roots to Rishi Termular, c. 200 CE, the group's central teaching is a blend of theism and monism. Individual souls seek God, and devotees and worshippers in this life and ultimately will merge totally with Shiva. Pashupata Shaivism, founded by Lakolasha, c. 200, and popular in far northeast, north, and western central India, holds a variation on that teaching. Souls finally merge with God but maintain individuality somewhat. As stars are lost as discrete bodies in the infinite night sky. Also found in the northern state of Kashmir is a distinctive Shaiva sect founded by Vasugupta, c. 800 CE. The Kashmiri school is monistic, teaching the complete and perfect oneness of all reality in Shiva. A major sect in northeast India is called Siddha Siddhanta, with roots in the teaching or Rishi Gorakshanatha. c. 950 CE. Blending theism and monism. This school says all individual things are eventually reabsorbed into Shiva as bubbles arise in water. A minor group still influential in southern India is called Shiva Advaita. Its first teacher, Shrikanta, c. 1050. Preferred a qualified theism in which the worshipper participates in divinity without losing identity. Finally, a major sect in southwest Indian is known as Virashaivism. Members are sometimes referred to as Lingayats because many carry with them in a small case a miniature Shiva Linga. A major poet called Basavanna, 1105–67, remains an influential source of the sect's teaching of qualified theism, according to which God is like the sun, souls its rays.
How do Hindus feel when one of their members decides to leave the faith?
Membership in most smaller local Hindu communities across India is so intimately linked with a larger network of social and economic factors that the notion of leaving the faith is virtually meaningless. To live in the community is to be a Hindu. In the big cosmopolitan cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Delhi, the matter is naturally more complex. Social relations are undergoing a higher rate of change in some places. But even there, most people who think of themselves as Hindu will likely continue to do so, whether or not they participate regularly in traditional religious observances. When individuals make a conscious effort to forsake the tradition altogether because they find that it no longer meets their needs, their families experience a sense of loss. One fewer member of the clan participates in the family's observance of the sacred occasions that have offered a sense of togetherness and joy. Individuals who drift away from traditional practice often continue to call themselves Hindu as a cultural identifier. And among immigrant families in the United States, for example, a surprising number of younger adults find themselves going in the opposite direction. Many feel a desire to return to the tradition because of an interest in their cultural roots.
Are there any signs or symbols that might identify an individual as a Hindu?
A small dot on the forehead, called a bindu or bindai, is perhaps the most common individual symbol in Hinduism. Many Indian women wear a small round red dot in the middle of the forehead to indicate that they are married. And some wear a black dot to ward off evil prior to marriage. Some regard the red dot as a generic symbol of one's Hindu faith, as worn by both men and women. Hindus in Europe and the United States sometimes have difficulty deciding whether to wear the dot in public or whether to confine its use to worship. As with so many personal religious symbols, it has become associated with issues of religious distinctiveness and cultural assimilation. Some believe the dot alludes to Shiva's third eye, a symbol of wisdom and divine power. Shaivites often wear 3 parallel horizontal lines on the forehead, and often on upper arms and on the chest as well. The marks are sometimes made with paint and sometimes with ash to symbolize cremation. Vaishnavites wear what appears to be a large V or double V on the forehead and sometimes on the upper arm.
What are some basic Hindu ethical considerations?
Hindu tradition describes a range of morally and religiously acceptable goals or motives for action. What matters most is not the substance of the particular type of goal, but the quality of one's intentions. All good things in life are gifts of God. One has only to learn how best to use and value them. In the greater scheme of things, 3 of the 4 major goals are means rather than ends in themselves. Even so, a devout Hindu can pursue them with vigor and determination. As long as the pursuit is balanced and not obsessive. Most fundamental is the goal of Dharma, the quest for one's own individual ethical calling in accord with the cosmic law that holds all things together. Personal justice and righteousness are the cardinal virtues. But wealth, material success, power, and social status, artha, are also worthy goals, so long as one keeps them in perspective. People who use their worldly success in ethically laudable ways are exercising responsible stewardship and can make wonderful things happen for the benefit of many. In addition, a devout Hindu can enjoy to the full all of life's legitimate pleasures. Kama, associated with culture, the arts, sexuality, and family life. This traditional teaching undercuts the common stereotype of Hinduism as world-rejecting and self-denying asceticism. On the other hand, the opposite stereotype that identifies Hinduism as the kind of wild-eyed lust sometimes associated with the Kama Sutra is equally inappropriate. Ultimately, Hindu tradition teaches the sincere seeker will find that none of the first 3 goals offers permanent satisfaction. What remains is the quest for final liberation from the enslavement that goes with even well-moderated attachments. Moksha, meaning release, is the only goal worthy of being considered an end in itself. Most people will spend many lifetimes striving for it.
What is the importance of the month of Ramadan?
During pre-Islamic times, the month called Ramadan, high summer, was religiously significant as a time during which the Arab tribes observed a truce from all hostilities. Of all the months, the Quran mentions only Ramadan by name, identifying it as the month during which the scripture was revealed. Scripture suggests that the initial divine revelation is the reason for the practice of fasting throughout the month. Ramadan begins with the sighting of the new moon on the last night of the 8th month. Each day, from dawn until sunset, Muslims are enjoined to fast from all food and liquid, as well as from sexual activity and other forms of sensual pleasure. Fasting also means refraining from negative attitudes and complaining, and developing a sense of solidarity with those who suffer from want all year long. After Muslims break the fast with some water and dates, they eat a meal before retiring. Before dawn they may have another meal, but limit other forms of celebration during the entire month. Special prayers are scheduled in mosques, along with the recitation of one of 30 sections of the Quran. completing the entire sacred text over the 30 nights. A number of important dates fall during Ramadan. Most important is the Night of Power. One of the odd-numbered nights among the last 10, usually observed on the 27th. Muslims believe that God's initial revelation to Muhammad makes this the holiest time of the entire year. Other important times during Ramadan include the birthday of the martyr Hussein, 6th, death of Muhammad's first wife Khadija, 10th, the Battle of Badr, a key event in 625, the 17th, the retaking of Mecca in 630, 19th. The deaths of Ali and of the 8th Shia Imam, Ali Reza, 21st, and Ali's birthday, 22nd. Where Muslims are in the majority or a very sizable minority. The rhythm of life slows dramatically during Ramadan. At the sighting of the next new moon, all rejoice in the feast of fast-breaking, Eid al-Fitr.
Are any occasions associated with Muhammad especially important?
Since medieval times, Muslims in many countries have celebrated Muhammad's birthday. Mawlid an-Nabi, on the 12th of Rabi'i. Street parties and grand banquets often provide opportunity for special prayers and speeches. A very popular part of the festivities is the recitation of a poem by the 13th century Egyptian poet Bizari, the Burda, pronounced Biyurda, mantle. Translated into Swahili and a number of other languages. The poem sings the Prophet's praises in truly cosmic terms, attributing to his birth all manner of marvels and blessings. In some places, where festivities are minimized or forbidden altogether. Even the Prophet's birthday is a kind of national holiday. On the 27th of Rajab, Muslims recall the night journey and ascension, Laylat al-Isra wal Miraj. According to traditional accounts, the Prophet experienced this timeless mystical moment sometime during the years just before the Hijrah. A major feature of the celebrations is the retelling of any of several narratives that follow. Gabriel and Muhammad through the heavens, including descriptions of his meetings and conversations with the other major prophets. Each associated with one of the 7 celestial levels. During the course of his journey, Muhammad received special instructions about instituting the 5 daily ritual prayers.
What activities do Muslims typically do in and around the mosque?
Throughout history and in many parts of the world, mosques have stood at the center of an enormous range of activities. In Egypt, Turkey, Iran, and India, for example, mosque complexes have combined educational facilities of various levels, libraries, medical schools, and hospitals, social service facilities, funerary facilities, and religious residences. Many of the monumental complexes depended on the sort of equally monumental royal patronage that is rare these days. but plans for somewhat less ambitious projects are afoot now in various parts of the United States. As local communities grow, mosque complexes will become increasingly visible. Meeting and social spaces are just the first of many needs beyond the basic requirement of a place for communal ritual prayer.
Does the beginning of the Muslim year have any particular significance?
During the first 10 days of the month of Muharram, Muslims reflect on a variety of spiritual themes. During Muhammad's time, the community observed a one-day fast on the 10th of the month. Ashura, pronounced Aashora. Possibly paralleling the Jewish practice of fasting on the 10th of Tishri, generally known as Yom Kippur. Though the major fast was formally shifted to Ramadan. Muslims still observe this day, some with fasting and special prayer. Like many holy days, Ashura has become associated with ancient events of great significance. This day marks the day on which Noah left the ark. Visitors to Mecca can enter the Kaaba itself, not just the sanctuary around it, on this day alone. But the first 10 days of the year are still more important for Shi'i Muslims. Some readers may recall the day in 1979 when Iranian students took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. It occurred on the 1st of Muharram in the year 1400 after the Hijra, the beginning of the traditional period of mourning for the proto-martyr Hussein, who died at the hands of a tyrannical ruler in the year 680 CE. Observance of the sad event gains in intensity until the actual day of martyrdom. Some observing a fast on the 9th day. On Ashura itself, some Shiites make pilgrimages to Karbala in Iraq, site of the martyrdom, or to the tombs of other imams in Iran and Iraq. In more traditional Shi'i villages, people still gather to reenact the events in a passion play called the Taziyah, pronounced Taziyah. Looking at the bigger picture, a hadith says that at the beginning of each new century, on the lunar Islamic calendar, God will raise up for the Muslim community a renewer who will call all believers to a fuller participation in the faith.
How do Hindus view Hinduism's relationships to other traditions?
For many centuries the greater Hindu tradition has shown enormous flexibility in adapting to religious pluralism. It came to be the greater Hinduism, in part at least, because of that quality of expansiveness. Many Hindus regard their religious heritage as a kind of spiritual umbrella capable of sheltering all who seek refuge beneath it. Historically, different denominations have drawn once separate traditions into their embrace. For example, Vaishnavite tradition came to incorporate Buddhism by installing the Buddha as the ninth of Vishnu's 10 avatars, a hospitable gesture, perhaps, but one that Buddhists do not recognize. Some Hindus have suggested that Jesus and other foundational figures also find a place in the greater Hindu scheme of things. A major early modern movement that began as an attempt to soften the animosity between Hindus and Muslims in northwestern India especially is now known as Sikhism. The Sikh community has become largely identified with a region called the Punjab, which straddles the India-Pakistan border. Sikh separatists have continued to assert their desire for a homeland.
When do Muslims make pilgrimage to Mecca and what do they do there?
Formal season for the greater pilgrimage, called the Hajj, occurs between the 8th and 13th day of the 12th lunar month. The journey is required of all Muslims with sufficient health and financial resources. Assuming also that making the Hajj would not require them to shirk serious family responsibilities at home. As pilgrims enter a forbidden zone that encircles Mecca, called the Haram, they put on the plain white wraps called the ihram, pronounced ihram. The garb marks a transition to sacred space and time, and reminds pilgrims of their simple equality before God. Though precise ritual activities depend on both variations within the four Sunni law schools as well as on whether or not pilgrims intend to combine Hajj with Umrah. Lesser pilgrimage, the following offers an idea of the major elements. On the first day, the 8th of the month, they usually circumambulate the Kaaba 7 times. Pray at the station of Abraham, pray 2 cycles of prostrations, and drink from the spring of Zamzam. Heading for Mina outside of Mecca. Most pilgrims will stay overnight there before moving on to the plain of Arafat. They stand before the Mount of Mercy, recalling the deeds of Muhammad and Abraham here long ago. That evening they go a short distance back toward Mecca, to Muzdalifah, where on the 3rd day they celebrate the Feast of Sacrifice, Eid al-Adha. Moving back to Mina later that day, pilgrims cast 7 stones at one of 3 pillars. A symbolic repudiation of the temptations of Satan. After a symbolic clipping or shaving of hair, pilgrims remove the ihram and return to Mecca to circumambulate the Kaaba and run 7 times between the hills Safa and Marwa to commemorate Hagar's frantic search for water. During the 11th through 13th days, pilgrims remain at Mina, casting the remainder of 49 stones collected earlier at all 3 of the pillars. Those who did not participate in the sacrifice on the 10th day may do so now. To end the whole event, most will again circumambulate the Kaaba 7 times. In recent years the Saudi government has expanded their pilgrimage facilities dramatically in order to accommodate annual crowds now numbering 2 million or more.
Do Hindus believe in the concept of salvation?
Most Hindus prefer the way of devotion because it is so concrete and personal. Bhakti offers the assurance of divine aid in all of life's difficulties, as well as cause for rejoicing in better times. Seekers who choose any of the classical spiritual paths are aware that human beings are ever in need of help from sources beyond themselves. But the notion of salvation assisted by divine grace is especially strong in popular theistic or devotional Hinduism. Even in the denominations that teach a modified form of predestination, such as those of Madhva and Vallabha, grace is a central feature of bhakti, since the human soul is, so to speak, naturally divine. Grace is the power that refreshes and renews the soul in its original state. Hindus, like members of various other major traditions, have held differing views as to how divine grace works. A particularly vivid pair of images characterizes one view as that of the cat school, another that of the monkey school. According to the cat school, divine grace is all-sufficient and does not depend at all on human action. Mother cats carry their kittens around by picking them up with their teeth. According to the monkey school, human beings must cooperate in the saving action of divine grace. Mother monkeys rescue their babies from danger, but the baby first climbs aboard and holds tight.
Are there Hindu fundamentalists?
If fundamentalism may be defined as an aggressive and intolerant religious exclusivism, there are several manifestations of it in the history of Hinduism. A 19th-century reformist movement called the Arya Samaj, Society of Aryans, sought to cleanse modern Hindu thought and practice of unnecessary clutter that had contaminated the tradition over the centuries. The society condemned not only Muslims and Christians but members of various Hindu denominations as well. To its great credit, the Arya Samaj attempted to make Hindu practice more egalitarian, giving women and socially marginal groups equal access. Another fundamentalist-style force in recent times has been the political faction called Bharatiya Janata or BJP. In 1992 the party supported agitation by the militant Vishva Hindu Parishad, Universal Hindu Assembly, to destroy a 16th-century mosque in Ayodhya. They wanted to replace the mosque with a temple to Rama and to rededicate the site as Rama's birthplace, which Muslims had desecrated centuries before. The VHP throws its considerable weight behind political candidates who promise to do whatever is necessary to keep power in the hands of Hindus.
Is there a central teaching authority for Hindus?
Since Hindu tradition is a complex of many denominations and sub-traditions, there is no central institutional structure that functions as a central teaching authority. Many of the individual denominations and sects maintain systems of checks on the integrity of the tradition in the form of teaching lineages. Instruction has historically been based on oral transmission of the basic sources, along with extensive commentary, both oral and written, on those sources. Perhaps the closest thing to centralized authority is the living master to whom disciples give their uncontested allegiance. That living master embodies both the authority of an unbroken succession of teachers and his or her personal authority as one spiritually connected to the ancient well springs of wisdom. Even the Vedas and the associated primary sacred texts grouped under the heading of Shruti, heard, do not claim the universal adherence of all Hindus.
What signs or symbols distinguish Hindu religious specialists?
Priests in most Hindu temples, whatever the denomination, generally wear a simple body wrap that covers one or both shoulders. Sometimes they will remove the upper wrap altogether. Priests may wear a white thread across the left shoulder, a symbol of initiation into the sacred scriptures. Some priests wear a set of beads, called a mala, or rosary, used to count in the repetition of sacred words or syllables, around the neck or wrist. Members of various monastic orders often wear a saffron or salmon-colored robe that is the habit or distinctive garb of the organization. Shaivite sadhus sometimes carry the trident, a symbol sacred to Shiva.
What solutions to the human predicament does Hindu tradition propose?
Hindus seek the ultimate spiritual goal of liberation through any of four traditional ways or paths called margas. Methods of seeking or yogas, joining by means of discipline. The most ancient and slowest method is that of ritual action, karma. Originally associated with scrupulous fulfillment of the prescriptions of Vedic ritual practice. Karma is kept within reach of contemporary Hindus by interpreting it as unselfish service. In that sense, the way of action recommends itself to all. Even in the absence of a vital tradition of ritual sacrifice. The second path begins with the conviction that ignorance causes suffering. Intuitive experiential knowledge, jnana, is available through various intellectual and meditative disciplines associated with a variety of philosophical approaches called darshanas, views. Most of all, the way of knowledge seeks the full realization of the perfect oneness of all reality and the illusory nature of our instinctive conviction that individuality of persons and multiplicity of all things is the substance of life. It is a difficult and abstract method attractive to relatively few people. Its best known form is that of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta school. Closely associated with the way of knowledge is a path that uses the formal disciplines popularly known as yoga. Proceeding from the conviction that suffering is the result of physical and mental distraction. Meditational yoga combines various physical practices, hatha yoga, designed to control one's physiological states. with belief in divine assistance toward higher contemplative states, Raja Yoga. Far more popular and accessible is the way of devotion or bhakti, participation. Whereas the way of knowledge seeks realization of a union that already exists in an impersonal ultimate reality, the way of devotion seeks to cultivate the union of the two distinct parties to the divine human relationship. Bhakti means dedication to a personal God whose love, mercy, and grace elicit a response of complete faith and surrender. It proceeds from the conviction that suffering arises out of separation from one's divine source and goal. The devotee approaches God in full confidence of divine protection and the hope of salvation.
Have there ever been schisms or heresies in Hinduism?
Toward the end of the Vedic period we find the first clear references to groups called Nastikas. Those who deny or naysayers. Early Jains and Buddhists represented the most important of the non-orthodox groups that eventually developed into distinct religious traditions. Nastikas are generically distinguished from the Astikas, those who affirmed the authority of the Vedas, the existence of an indestructible soul, and the existence of God as an essential salvific power. Exponents of Brahmanic or priestly Hinduism have had a particularly large stake in combating the erosive influence of various nonconformist sectarian developments over many centuries. Some have eventually been reabsorbed into the greater Hinduism while others, such as Buddhism and Jainism, have remained distinct.
Do Hindus have a system of religious law?
Surely the single most important Hindu religious concept is that of Dharma. As a universal notion, Dharma is the cosmic law that binds all things together. Each individual person also has his or her Dharma. The fundamental religious requirements and ethical expectations associated with each person's station in life. Classical Hindu sources also use the term dharma in reference to countless specific moral duties and ritual rubrics. Treatises called Shastras are the principal repositories of the Hindu legal and ethical materials. They belong to the larger category of sacred literature called Smriti, remembered, revered as of divine origin, but subordinate in authority to Shruti, heard, scriptures. The Dharma Shastras, and related texts like the Grihaya Sutras that include detailed information on every facet of householder life, derive ultimately from a text generally known as the Laws of Manu, dated variously from 600 BCE to 100 CE. The ancient law books have retained their authority well into modern times. Only recently have India's legislative bodies introduced serious and sweeping reforms. But the antiquity of tradition and inherent cultural resistance to change have kept many practices alive in spite of official attempts to adapt the classics to contemporary needs.
What do Hindus think about history and time?
Imagine a bird flying past the Himalayas every 100 years, brushing the mountain peaks with the silk scarf it holds in its beak. What we call history is the time it would take that bird to wear the mountains flat. And that would be only an infinitesimal fraction of divine time. History is an infinite cycle made up of smaller, measurable cycles of creation and destruction, but even the smaller cycles are unimaginably long. Hindu myth says that God, manifested as Brahma the creator, unfolds the material world over and over. Each lifetime of Brahma lasts 100 divine years. Each day in the life of the creator deity is called a kalpa, lasting 4,320,000,000 years. Each kalpa, or great age, Mahayuga, in turn is made up of 4 ages or eons called yugas. The present cycle of human history began with the first yuga, a time of order and peace when the cosmic law, dharma, kept evil in check. During the second age, disorder entered history. Dharma diminished, as did the span of human life. There followed a third age, when evil gained still greater strength and dharma weakened. Social fragmentation gave rise to the caste system and attempts to gain power through ritual sacrifice. We are now in the fourth and bleakest age, a time of darkness and lawlessness destined to end in 400,000 years. Then, after a period of quiescence, all will begin again, another day in the life of Brahma. Key concepts in Hinduism: Atman, the indivisible and indestructible spiritual center of each being, and the ultimate self underlying all reality. Avatar, a crossing over downward, a deities, especially Vishnu's descent into the world of human experience. Bhakti, participation, devotional relationship to one's chosen deity, a major path to liberation. Brahman, ultimate reality enveloping all appearances of multiplicity. Dharma, that which holds all things together, the cosmic law, religio-social propriety. One's individual religious duty, and one of the 4 acceptable goals of life. Jnana, knowledge, insight into the spiritual meaning of things, one of the principal paths to liberation. Kama, pleasure, one of the 4 legitimate goals of life. Karma, action, ritual, or ethical conduct and the consequences thereof. One of the traditional paths to liberation. Marga, path, way, method of spiritual progress toward liberation. Moksha, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, ultimate goal of Hindu spiritual practice. Samsara, journeying, the endless round of rebirth from which Hindus seek to be free. Yoga, joining, harnessing, system of physical and spiritual disciplines practiced by a yogi.
Have Hindus traditionally sent out missionaries to convert others?
Hinduism has generally not produced the kind of missionary activity characteristic of traditions like Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Significant traces of Hindu tradition and culture are very much in evidence all over Southeast Asia, especially in parts of Indonesia. Throughout late antiquity, 4th through 8th centuries, and the Middle Ages, 9th through 15th centuries, important Hindu dynasties ruled portions of present-day Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Major archaeological research attests to their splendor and power. But their trappings of Hindu symbol and ritual were less a matter of missionary zeal than of a desire to cloak themselves with the prestige of the great Indian dynasties. In addition, they sought to enhance their political legitimacy through the concept of divine kingship by identifying their monarchs as descendants of the gods. In modern times, however, a number of missionary organizations have grown from Hindu roots. In addition to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Vivekananda's 1863 to 1902, Ramakrishna Mission has made important contributions in this regard. Although its gains have been modest in terms of numbers, the mission's members have become known for various kinds of social outreach as well as for offering lectures and spiritual guidance. In many major United States cities, branches of an organization called the Vedanta Society appeal to a well-educated public by emphasizing the traditional way of knowledge rather than the way of devotion preferred by both Vivekananda and his teacher Ramakrishna, 1834-86.
Is there a standard Islamic group liturgical worship?
Islamic ritual prayer, performed 5 times daily, is called salat, from a root that means to make holy. Whenever Muslims gather, they perform the ritual prayer together. That applies not only to the prescribed Friday midday congregational prayer but to any of the set times at which 2 or more Muslims come together any day of the week, whether in the mosque or elsewhere. As with all Muslim ritual practice, worshippers preface this prayer with the clearly stated intention. Naya, pronounced Niyah, saying I intend to pray the dawn, for example, salat. From 2 to 4 cycles of standing, bowing to place hands on knees, ruku, pronounced rukoo. Sitting on the heels, jalsa, pronounced jalsa, stretching forward toward prostration. Sajda, pronounced sajda, to place hands flat on the floor at shoulder width. And touching the forehead to the floor, make up the fundamental salat ritual. The number of cycles, rak'ah, pronounced rak'ah, depends on which prescribed prayer one is performing.
Do Muslims ever visit their holy cities outside of the formal pilgrimage season?
Hajj, or major pilgrimage, fulfills a religious duty only in connection with the formal season. but travelers to the holy city can perform the Umrah or lesser pilgrimage any time of year. Umrah is a strictly devotional activity, optional but highly recommended. Rituals include a much scaled-down version of important Hajj activities. To be more precise, Umrah is actually a component of Hajj that can be performed separately. Pilgrims enter into the state of ritual consecration by donning the same seamless white cloth worn for Hajj. Before entering the sacred zone surrounding Mecca, they proceed to the Kaaba, circumambulate it 7 times, perform 2 cycles of ritual prayer. Take a drink from the well of Zamzam, and walk rapidly 7 times between the small hillocks called Marwa and Safa. They conclude the lesser pilgrimage by clipping a lock of hair or shaving the head, symbolizing the spiritual change desired as a result of the pilgrimage. As at Hajj time, many pilgrims add a visit to the Prophet's mosque in Medina. But that is a separate devotional activity.
What are some of the other religious days Muslims observe?
On the 15th of Shaban, many Muslims, especially in South Asia, observe the night of forgiveness, Laylat al-Bara'ah, pronounced Bara'a. Popular belief says that the names of all persons are written on the leaves of a great cosmic tree. On the evening of the 14th, the tree shakes and loses some of its leaves. Those whose leaves fall are destined to die during the coming year. According to a hadith, God comes down to the lowest heaven that night and asks if anyone seeks forgiveness. That is the moment for all to wipe the slate clean, since no one knows whether his or her leaf has fallen. Celebrations of many holy persons, often centering around the individual's tomb, vary according to region. In addition to birthday, Mawlid, and death anniversary, URS, celebrations, Muslims in various places observe seasonal times. Mawsim, with festivities connected to agricultural or other natural cycles. One such celebration is that of Nabi Musa, Prophet Moses. Observed around his alleged tomb shrine near Jericho. Its timing coincides roughly with the Orthodox Christian Holy Week, featuring elaborate processions that begin in Jerusalem.
Do Muslims celebrate events in connection with any other religious figures?
Popular practice in many places still includes annual commemorations of birthdays and death anniversaries of various important holy persons and friends of God. Birthday celebrations of members of the Prophet's family, such as Sayyidah Zainab, remain popular in places like Egypt. Lasting for up to 7 days, the festivities are like sprawling street parties. Crowds grow daily, as does the intensity of the celebration. Vendors sell food and souvenirs, and Quran reciters fill the air with sacred sounds from their booths up and down the streets. Mosques within the central area of celebration can be packed to overflowing. Birthdays of famous friends of God frequently include recitation of classic poems extolling the saints' spiritual achievements and glorious intimacy with God. Anniversaries of the death of God's special friends are also important in many regions, especially those further to the east, since holy persons are fully united with God at death. The occasions are sometimes referred to as the saint's wedding day, URS, pronounced OORS. On the 6th of Rajab, many Indian Muslims, and members of other faiths as well, observe the URS of Muin ad-Din Kishti, founder of a famous Sufi order, at his tomb in the city of Ajmer.
Why do Muslims bury their dead so quickly?
Although there's no time limit, most Muslims are buried within 24 hours of their death. The tradition originated out of the practical need to keep bodies from deteriorating in the Middle Eastern heat. Although many Muslims now live in countries where technology allows bodies to be preserved, most avoid embalming, because they believe it violates the dignity of the deceased. For the very same reason, Muslims don't believe in displaying a body as is common at many Christian funerals.
How and where do members of local Hindu communities come together?
Local and regional temples are the major gathering places. Hindus use religiously and socially and support financially. Individual temples in India are generally dedicated predominantly to a particular deity. Most center around some aspect or manifestation of Shiva or Vishnu, or one of their major female consorts or counterparts. A temple will typically also have subordinate shrines dedicated to other names and forms of the central deity. Some smaller local temples may also belong exclusively to sex-worshipping deities largely unknown outside the area. Most temples draw sectarian client. In many regions outside India, however, greater diversity in the makeup of local communities often requires greater flexibility in the religious orientation of temples. For example, Indian immigrants around American cities such as Pittsburgh and St. Louis come from various places in India and represent a variety of sectarian backgrounds. As a result, the temples that serve the regions are sensitive to a wider spectrum of devotional needs than might be the case at a local temple in an area where Hindus are in the majority and where one sect predominates. Large temples in both Pittsburgh and St. Louis have been funded by Indian populations largely of immigrants from South India. Both temples are therefore dedicated to a popular South Indian manifestation of Vishnu called Sri Venkateshvara, Lord of the Sin-Forgiving Hill. But in order to serve the diverse local population, both temples include prominent devotional symbolism familiar both to Shaivites and to Vaishnavites.
What other ideals does the Hindu tradition recommend?
A classical formulation of the ideal life cycle is called the 4 stages of life. It applies almost exclusively to males, but the implications for women are fairly clear. The traditional system is called Varnashramadharma. The law, dharma, of caste, varna, and life stage, ashrama. Upper caste Hindu males begin the cycle as students, in a stage between the ages of 12 and 24. Under the tutelage of a guru, young men learn the basic sacred traditions, rituals, and sacred texts. From ages 24 to 48 they become householders, marrying and raising a family according to conventional norms. During these first 2 stages, men seek religious fulfillment by turning outward and engaging their world with extroverted energy and drive. At 48 a man enters into the stage of a forest dweller or senior mentor to younger men. Some still actually move toward a life of greater solitude during this stage. Even if not literally heading for a hermitage in the forest. Some men past the age of 72 enter the stage of the renunciant or sannyasi. They formally set aside as many ordinary ties to their former lives as possible, leaving behind wealth as well as material responsibility in quest of self-realization. Both of the latter 2 stages call for increasing introspection and time for personal prayer and devotion. Though fewer individuals follow the 4 stages formally now than in the past, the cycle remains a traditional ideal and a useful map of spiritual progress for those who choose to pursue it.
Does that mean Hindus do not believe in heaven or hell?
Traditional Hindu cosmologies speak of 3 realms of existence or lokas. One scheme describes an in-between realm, Antarloka, where individual souls abide both during sleep and between incarnations. This reflects the persistence of important features of ancient Vedic views of the cosmos. A version of hell called Naraka, literally, referring to humankind, is a thoroughly unpleasant lower part of the Antarloka that functions rather like a purgatory. In any of its 7, or even as many as 21 levels, souls can overcome through suffering some of the effects of bad karma. A multi-leveled region called Anandloka, realm of bliss, also called Svarga, region of light, is roughly equivalent to a paradise or heaven. It is a temporary abode in which people who have died approaching liberation acquire knowledge that can assist them toward greater spiritual progress in their next life. Hindu cosmology includes multiple levels, both in this in-between realm and in the uppermost realms beyond that reserved for those who have achieved moksha. Most Hindus regard the intermediate equivalents of heaven and hell as temporary, although some smaller sects teach the existence of more or less permanent abodes of punishment in the next life.
Who are the main Hindu religious officials or specialists?
Traditional Hindu vocabulary includes dozens of technical terms to designate virtually every imaginable variety of religious function or specialized qualification. Essential to every Hindu temple is its priestly staff. Larger temples often have many priests, sometimes called pujaris, those who engage in the daily worship called puja on the staff, one of whom generally serves as chief or senior priest. People generally address priests as Shri, the equivalent of Reverend. Frequently but not exclusively of the Brahmin caste nowadays, temple priests marry and have families. At temples that have become important pilgrimage centers, specialists called pandas serve as pilgrim guides and keep records of the families who make up the regular membership of the temple. Ritual specialists called purohitas, those who lead, are generally Brahmins of the Smarta denominations who do mostly home ceremonies for Brahmin families. Gurus, who are generally learned Brahmins, still almost exclusively perform the various samskaras, or rites of passage, and tutor upper caste children in the ancient traditions.
Do Muslims engage in any specific purification rituals?
Prior to each act of ritual prayer, Muslims perform a brief purification called wudu, pronounced wudu. Worshippers perform each of the following cleansing motions 3 times, rinse hands and wrists. Rinse out the mouth, then the nostrils likewise, rinse the whole face. Arms up to the elbows, whole head and neck, and finally toes and feet up to the ankles. Mosques today typically provide separate facilities in which men and women can perform the ablution. Older mosques often have fountains or taps running along an exterior wall, with small benches or stools for worshippers to sit on. They usually use tap water, but under peculiar circumstances even sand or earth is acceptable, in which case it is called tayammum, pronounced tawammum. Clearly the idea is to prepare oneself symbolically to enter a special state of mindfulness. In addition to this cleansing, Muslims also regard a more thorough bathing, called ghusl, essential to restore the state of ritual purity after sexual intercourse, seminal discharge, or the menstrual cycle. Ghusl includes the motions of the ablution just described, but encompasses the entire body as well. The intent of these rituals is to put the individual in a state of maximum attentiveness to and spiritual worthiness for entering into the presence of God.
Are there religious hierarchical structures in any branch of Hinduism?
None of Hinduism's various denominations has ever developed a formal institutional hierarchy parallel to those of, for example, Roman Catholicism or Shiite Islam. But there have been de facto social rankings in which some representatives of the tradition have very definite priority. In Vedic times, there were at least 7, and perhaps as many as 16 different types of priests, distinguished according to specific function in the Vedic sacrifice. Among them were the Brahmins. The one category of priests that has retained its influence over the centuries. Hindu religious hierarchy has generally ranked its specialists according to learning, with teachers and guardians of tradition, such as gurus, acharyas, and pundits, ranking high on the list. Historically, figures called the Purohita served as high priests at the courts of Hindu monarchs. That individual's role was to protect his royal patron through ritual and teaching, as well as by his spiritually potent presence. In modern times, the Purohita has become the family priest, charged with keeping caste and ritual practices intact. Temple priesthood staffs typically have chief priests, who supervise the overall running of the temple rituals.
Are there religious hierarchical structures in any branch of Hinduism?
None of Hinduism's various denominations has ever developed a formal institutional hierarchy parallel to those of, for example, Roman Catholicism or Shiite Islam. But there have been de facto social rankings in which some representatives of the tradition have very definite priority. In Vedic times, there were at least 7, and perhaps as many as 16 different types of priests, distinguished according to specific function in the Vedic sacrifice. Among them were the Brahmins, the one category of priests that has retained its influence over the centuries. Hindu religious hierarchy has generally ranked its specialists according to learning, with teachers and guardians of tradition, such as gurus, acharyas, and pundits, ranking high on the list. Historically, figures called the Purohita served as high priests at the courts of Hindu monarchs. That individual's role was to protect his royal patron through ritual and teaching, as well as by his spiritually potent presence. In modern times, the Purohita has become the family priest, charged with keeping caste and ritual practices intact. Temple priesthood staffs typically have chief priests, who supervise the overall running of the temple rituals.
How are Hindu religious leaders chosen and given authority?
Priesthood is generally a hereditary office, with families often tracing their sacerdotal lineages back many generations. Priests who serve in local temples are not typically members of the Brahmin caste, but their religious roles are likewise hereditary. Spiritual guides and teachers called gurus are those who rise to local or wider prominence as a result of their proficiency in various facets of religious knowledge and practical wisdom. In this instance, the classical system of training provides the equivalent of a license or seal of approval. But many famous teachers achieve wider notoriety as a result of popular acclaim. They set up shop initially, so to speak, with official sanction as products of the system. But their spiritual prowess spreads by word of mouth. Other religious figures gain prominence outside the system. An individual's reputation for holiness begins when those around him or her observe special powers or qualities, and grows as seekers gather in hopes of sharing in the wisdom and sanctity.
How are Hindu religious leaders chosen and given authority?
Priesthood is generally a hereditary office, with families often tracing their sacerdotal lineages back many generations. Priests who serve in local temples are not typically members of the Brahmin caste, but their religious roles are likewise hereditary. Spiritual guides and teachers called gurus are those who rise to local or wider prominence as a result of their proficiency in various facets of religious knowledge and practical wisdom. In this instance, the classical system of training provides the equivalent of a license or seal of approval. But many famous teachers achieve wider notoriety as a result of popular acclaim. They set up shop initially, so to speak, with official sanction as products of the system. But their spiritual prowess spreads by word of mouth. Other religious figures gain prominence outside the system. An individual's reputation for holiness begins when those around him or her observe special powers or qualities, and grows as seekers gather in hopes of sharing in the wisdom and sanctity.
What is the caste system?
India's ancient Hindu social system combines several complex elements. Perhaps best known are the four principal varnas or social classes. The term varna means color or appearance. As early as the Vedic period, the Brahmin or priestly class rose to the top of the social ladder. They were responsible for maintaining the integrity of ritual practice and traditional teaching. Nowadays, Brahmins are by no means all connected with priestly activities as such. One rung below the Brahmins are the Kshatriyas, those who govern. Traditionally called the warrior or princely class. They have been the legislators as well as enforcers of the law. On the next lower rung are the more numerous merchants, financiers, agriculturalists, and industrialists who comprise the Vaishya class. As class designations, the terms Kshatriya and Vaishya are now obsolete. Most numerous of all are the Shudras, the laborers and craftspersons who perform the basic services. Varna distinctions generally cut across language, occupational and geographical barriers. In addition to the four varnas are the hundreds, perhaps even as many as 4,000, of jatis. Jati means birth or species and refers to the countless local social groups defined by occupation and language. As many as 25,000 additional groupings are called subcastes. Members of both jatis and subcastes generally associate themselves with one of the varnas. and many Indians still observe strict rules of purity and separation. Finally, between 1 and 200 million people are considered outcasts. Untouchables, or unscheduled classes, those who don't fit in the great system. Since India gained independence, the caste system has been officially illegal. But systems of such antiquity do not yield readily to legislation passed in capital cities.
What is the caste system?
India's ancient Hindu social system combines several complex elements. Perhaps best known are the four principal varnas or social classes. The term varna means color or appearance. As early as the Vedic period, the Brahmin or priestly class rose to the top of the social ladder. They were responsible for maintaining the integrity of ritual practice and traditional teaching. Nowadays, Brahmins are by no means all connected with priestly activities as such. One rung below the Brahmins are the Kshatriyas, those who govern. Traditionally called the warrior or princely class. They have been the legislators as well as enforcers of the law. On the next lower rung are the more numerous merchants, financiers, agriculturalists, and industrialists who comprise the Vaishya class. As class designations, the terms Kshatriya and Vaishya are now obsolete. Most numerous of all are the Shudras, the laborers and craftspersons who perform the basic services. Varna distinctions generally cut across language, occupational and geographical barriers. In addition to the four varnas are the hundreds, perhaps even as many as 4,000, of jatis. Jati means birth or species and refers to the countless local social groups defined by occupation and language. As many as 25,000 additional groupings are called subcastes. Members of both jatis and subcastes generally associate themselves with one of the varnas. And many Indians still observe strict rules of purity and separation. Finally, between 1 and 200 million people are considered outcasts. Untouchables, or unscheduled classes, those who don't fit in the great system. Since India gained independence, the caste system has been officially illegal. But systems of such antiquity do not yield readily to legislation passed in capital cities.